Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next session at the GRC Summit 2021. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be having a short panel discussion on a very important regime, UK SOX. My name is Harry Noter, and I'm a Senior Director at MetricStream for our GRC business based in the UK. So let me quickly introduce the panel for this session. Firstly, we have Harvey Bootland. So Harvey is a Group Head of Controls at Shell. As such, he's responsible on behalf of the Group Controller for providing oversight and guidance on Shell's financial control framework, including the SOX annual attestation. His previous experience includes a variety of financial controls and business financial roles within Shell, as well as external audit experience with Ernst & Young. Harvey's a chartered accountant and based in the UK. We also have Nathan Bather. So Nathan is the financial controller for governance across the air sector of BAE Systems, responsible for the oversight of work across the three lines of defence, as well as supporting the implementation of the new UK corporate governance reforms across the group. Nathan has worked in a number of divisions in BAE Systems, including transformation and governance. Finally, we have Nehal Jilka. So Nehal is a partner at KPMG UK with over 20 years experience developing, implementing and testing frameworks surrounding financial, operational and IT controls and processes. Nehal has worked for over 300 clients across the globe, specializing in helping the organizations actually transform their controls and increase the level of maturity through the use of technology and data solutions. Nehal is also a leader in the KPMG steering group for the UK response to the proposed SOX framework. So Nehal, actually, let me start with the first question to yourself, if I may. There still seems to be a lot of ambiguity around the accountability and scope of the UK SOX program. Could you throw a little bit more light and perspective on this, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And hi, everybody. So there continues to remain ambiguity around accountability and scope. And let's go back a bit. The white paper, the BAE's white paper, came out on the 18th of March. It had 98 questions that were up for consultation. And on the 8th of July, that consultation closed. There were hundreds and hundreds of responses to that. It got a lot of traction from organizations, industry forums, accounting firms, etc., etc. Since that July the 8th, there has been no official commentary from BAE's or the UK government around where this is heading. What there has been is several industry forums and discussions with various organizations, and we are expecting an update later this year, by the end of the year or early next year, on the trajectory, and that will probably see some of the recommendations implemented or some form of next steps actions on those. But as of today, we don't have any concrete accountability and scope. But what I would like to go through is actually a little bit broader around what we're hearing from the various forums, including discussions held with the regulators, but also various industry bodies. I think that's useful to see in terms of what we're hearing. Now, last week, there was a bunch of articles as well in the news around some of the comments made by some of the regulators. So please do look at that. But more importantly, I think there are some trends that we're seeing for financial controls. And I'm just going to go through those trends that we've seen from probably 50 plus companies who are UK listed. And the first of those trends is actually that there's an increase now of awareness and visibility of controls at the audit committee at the board level. So we're actually absolutely seeing greater transparency and reporting up to the board and audit committee on controls. So it's going to be the norm that you will have to have enhanced reporting and visibility on all controls. Secondly, we have seen a significant amount of companies start up their controls programs for financial controls. Now, the scope of these has varied. I'm not aware of one that's gone full US SOX, but they have started on the journey of things such as scoping of entities, documentation of processes and controls. So really, it's something that is considered no regret actions because we should be doing it. And there's also been quite a lot of cultural change and awareness programs that have been run. The third trend is around the integration of controls into digital transformation, whether that is a transformation in finance, IT, HR, etc. But also, we've seen a significant increase in the requirement for GRC technology to manage the controls instead of using spreadsheets or SharePoint. And that, for example, is being used for self-assessment by control owners, and really having that single source of the truth as you go and document all the controls. And finally, we're actually starting to see a little bit of an evolution, not just from financial controls, but looking at entire control frameworks as an opportunity. So that is standardizing controls across non-financial areas of risk and disclosures, such as an increase in ESG disclosures and the controls associated with that. That's a trend that we've seen in the US as financial control frameworks increasingly extend across to other critical investor metrics. So those, Harvey, are the four themes that I've seen. Harvey, Harry.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Daniel. And it sounds like there's been some good work by the participants already, some pre-work, which is excellent. Good to hear, and some excellent trends there. Thanks for highlighting that. Harvey, do you want to add anything to this? Because I know this is also quite dear to your heart.
Well, that's. I mean, I agree with everything that Niall's just been saying, and particularly for an organisation like Shell, where we're already applying US SOX, we're a long way down the journey on financial controls. But particularly, I'll pick up on what he's saying on non-financial controls, and he sort of started by saying it's still unclear what we'll get in terms of recommendation. That's very true, but it's likely that we'll see either through legislation or just through ongoing trends a focus on that non-financial aspect. And we are working very hard to bring some of the discipline and the rigor and the skills that we've applied for US SOX over about 15 years now to some of the other areas. And Niall mentioned ESG. We're also bringing that to some of our carbon reporting. And it really serves us well in providing assurance externally in some of these ESG statements we're making. So very much agree with what Niall said.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Harvey. And I think that kind of leads into a second question, which I'll direct to yourself, Harvey. So we've had a number of clients kind of talking about, well, they've already been covered by US SOX. So based on your experience and the work that you've done at Shell, if an organization is already falling under either US or JSOX, how can they avoid kind of duplication of efforts when they start to implement UK SOX?
So for me, I would say that there is a risk of duplication. We asked in our responses, and I don't think we were alone in doing so for equivalence, if they were to bring forward a UK SOX regime to ensure that it is equivalent with what we're already doing. But there is a risk that they come with something that's slightly different, and then we start duplicating. Our approach, both in the face of this legislation, and other changes, is principally and most importantly not to treat things as a compliance exercise. It's very easy to get legislative requirement and then think, right, we must comply with that. What are the steps that we need to go through? But that's quite limited. And if we look at the financial control framework or the wider Shell control framework, the purpose of that is to assist us in managing our business, and that might be managing commercial risk, it might be managing financial risk, there'll be an element of managing reporting risk, and there'll be an element of regulation. And if I look at my own area of financial controls, that's not just US SOX, that's our UK corporate governance requirements. It's things like senior accounting officer regime in the UK, where we're very reliant upon the control framework for making our statements under that. So thinking about the control framework in terms of its purpose and its objective, and not just as a compliance activity, is the first step for me. And then from there, once you're comfortable that you're achieving your organizational objective, then you are layering onto, right, which are the components of this that are most relevant, in this discussion for UK SOX, previously for us under US SOX. And if you take that view, you can just designate the parts that you actually want to rely upon, particularly the parts that you might want to have audited. So it's, as I say, having a holistic view of what your control framework is for and what you're trying to achieve, and then being very deliberate about the parts that you specifically want to designate and focus on, when it comes to making some of these external attestations. And then you can compare against each and just ensure that either, if you've done a gap analysis, you're covering gaps, but critically to your question, that you're not duplicating efforts.
Excellent. That's really sound advice. And Nathan, given your work that you've done at BAE Systems, any thoughts and experience you can add to this?
Yeah, I think so we started to do that kind of data gathering stage in terms of what other companies are doing in the same space. So we've got aerospace peers in the US that are already operating under the US SOX. And one of the key takeaways that I took from that is, it's very easy to go, right, every control that we've got is a SOX control. Actually, that's not the case. It's identifying the key controls that matter. And I think that's how we make sure as governance leaders, we don't overburden the business. It's about identifying what's the key control and then how we evidence it, rather than just saying, right, blanket statement, all of these controls need evidence.
Excellent. And now, given your exposure to so many of the clients, from your experience and what you're seeing with these engagements, is this a valid concern you're seeing around organizations, holding back in investments or doing things thinking that they might be duplicating efforts or putting their investments in the wrong place because it's just a bit too early?
Yes, and we are seeing that trend around. Let's not go big bang at the moment and do a massive transformation. It's about starting in the right steps. So when we talked about this, effectively it's pre-legislation activities or no regret actions. And Nathan hit it on the nail there around getting to a real concrete set of scope. So we do believe that just scoping in terms of those entities, processes and controls is something we should be doing anyway, to work out what in our business, detects or prevents material issues in our financial statements. So I absolutely believe that investment on those pre-legislation activities, whether including the scoping, training and education awareness and the documentation, will help. And then as soon as we know what the specifics of the regulation is, how far it is to US SOX away, or is it a SOX light, etc., then we can just course correct when that happens.
Excellent. Perfect. No, thanks for those contributions. I think some really good insights there. The third question, I'll address it to Nathan. So when UK SOX is implemented, what do you feel the impact will be to the different teams in the organization pre and post the implementation phase based on your experience?
Yeah, I think that's probably the key worry bit that a lot of organizations have got. If I talk about it from a BAE standpoint, and it sounds like Shell are in a similar position, we've got quite a mature financial control framework. Now granted, SOX is wider than that, so we'll need to ensure that we're covering all the bases. But if your organisation's in a mature place, they've got a control framework. For me, it is really about going, how do we evidence those controls rather than just documenting that we've got them and that they're operating effectively. So for me, again, our role as governance leads and leaders across industries, what I'm aiming for with my team is to say, right, this is how we evidence, with, again, not putting this additional burden on the business to say, right, all this work that you've done, you've now got to duplicate to evidence it to this requirement. It's about how do we do that in a seamless way. And the MechStream tool is one option we're looking at in terms of how we do that, using that tool to provide evidence rather than just the attestation to say the control works. Now, for organisations that are maybe less mature in that, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of just documenting what the controls are. Rather than where I'm at in terms of we've got the controls. It's about identifying the key controls and then making sure there's an efficient way that we can evidence that those controls are in operation. And I think back to Harvey and Neil's point around, it's not just finance. These are not just financial controls we're looking at. It's much wider. So we need to make sure that we've got an eyeball on that as well, because some other functions are less mature.
Excellent. And Harvey, based on the implementation work you've done on both the frameworks and the ongoing work you're doing on frameworks, but also the technologies that you've implemented, and any kind of experience or insights from an implementation perspective?
So, I would agree with everything that Nathan said. I think that it cannot be overstated that although particularly financial accounting teams largely culturally will have a controls mindset, will particularly understand the audit requirements. Once you apply a regime like SOX, the standard is significantly higher, and that will be something, of a thing to bridge really across. but probably not insurmountable. From the one thing I would say, particularly about the accounting teams, is not just to essentially be victims of the process. It's very, very important, as Nihal said, to get the groundwork done, to have your processes and your controls documented. Can't really progress unless you have those things. But once you have those things in place, actually you have an opportunity to look at automation opportunities, standardization, and so using the implementation of a SOX regime, whether it's US or UK, as a catalyst for improving some of your finance process, that's really there as an opportunity, and I'd encourage people to say that. Then you asked about technology. That sort of ties into it. There's an awful lot of stuff that's on the market that you can use for automation, whether it's continuous control monitoring, whether it's analytics or robotics. So again, I would encourage people to take a really broad view in terms of what they're doing, because it is an opportunity to upscale your control framework. And then one final point I would make is the critical lesson that we have learned both at the start and repeatedly over a decade and a half is, do not underestimate the importance of your IT function as you go through any sort of SOX implementation, partly because culturally they won't be used to it, but also your IT systems are the foundation that any control framework sits upon in a modern company. And so if your IT controls and your approach to IT risk management isn't right on point, essentially you're building it on sand, and that's not a good place to be. So I would encourage everyone early engagement with IT.
Yeah, actually, that's something that we're seeing here at MetricStream as well. Many of our clients, that kind of the disparity between financial and IT controls, and this new regime is certainly highlighting some of those things. But I would like to get some kind of inputs from Nehal, actually, because I'm sure you're going to I'm sure you're having lots of conversations around the preparation for the implementation phase and the type of things that clients will be kind of asking you for from an advice perspective. Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and some of the things I mentioned earlier around no regret actions, but building a program that is sustainable in nature, as Harvey talked around, in terms of the integration into your existing programs, existing finance processes, IT processes. So I would start off with those 3 or 4 areas around scoping, documentation, and also the cultural and change piece of this is taking individuals and teams, especially those outside of finance as well, on the journey around educational sessions around what's the basics of internal controls over financial reporting, IT general controls, what does good look like, even if we didn't go down a US SOX route. Because some of these things are no-brainers, whether you do a balance sheet rec, or you have passwords on your system, or you approve changes, etc. Is things you should be doing anyway to protect your organization and the financial statements and so forth. So the key thing is what we're seeing is clear transparency of the journey that you're going to go on over the next 2 to 3 years to get to some kind of regime, but then really focused on those first 6 months prior to any legislation coming out.
Yeah, excellent. So I think we're getting a mix of clients and market participants at different phases and different stages of discussions and preparation for this new regime. Just before we kind of wrap up, now it'd be great to get kind of your final thoughts in terms of some of the key messages that you're giving to clients at this stage when there is still some ambiguity. The scope is not clearly defined. We've got some good ideas, some good practices, and some really interesting stuff that was mentioned today. But what are you kind of your key messages that you're giving to clients right now is?
Sure. The first one is there's no need to panic. We have time, so don't panic and rush. Start planning now, but not just for the internal control statement. That is just consultation. It's all the other areas of potential changes in disclosures, including things such as resiliency, audit and assurance policy, which links into your principal risk disclosures and the level of assurance you have over those. So I would be looking at all of those in the same line. Where are we today? What do we need to do in terms of no regret actions before we know the specifics? And ultimately, if everything you do is embedded in terms of the value and outcomes to your investors and to your board, then that would be a good thing if you can just achieve that.
Fantastic. Well, this has been really insightful. Harvey, Nathan, Nehal, thank you for your thoughts and insights. I really appreciate it. So with that said, let's close this session and I'll hand it back to the moderator. Thank you all again.